Okay, we're up to the Mishnah, Daf Amid Aleph. The Mishnah is going to be talking about the ceremony of how they would cut the barley for the Omer. Now, one thing to remember, and this is one of the themes of today's Daf, it's just kedai to speak it out now, is that the Pasuk never says when to bring the Omer. It says Mimachras HaShabbos. Now, Chazal interpret that Machras HaShabbos technically means the day after Shabbos. Now, the day after Shabbos is Sunday. But Chazal interpret it that it doesn't actually mean Sunday, but rather Machras HaShabbos. Shabbos in this context is Pesach. Machras HaShabbos means the day after the first day of Pesach, i.e. the first day of Chol Hamoed. The Baisusim, who don't have the oral Torah, say no. They interpreted it as the day after, the Sunday after Pesach. So according to them, it could be the first day of Chol Hamoed, it could be the third day of Chol Hamoed, whatever. It was much more fluid. But according to Chazal, it was always the first day of Chol Hamoed. Now, because of that discrepancy between the Baisusim and the Rabbanon, Chazal wanted that the ceremony of the Omer would be publicized, because they wanted them to understand that the Chazal interpret the Torah properly, and there's no other confusion. So, as we're going to see in this Mishnah, everything was public, because they wanted to just make sure that people understood it's always done the first day of Chol Hamoed. So the Mishnah says, Keitzad hayosin, how would they reap the barley? So they would get the barley, they would bring the carbon the first day of Chol Hamoed. The barley was reaped the night of Chol Hamoed, the first night, so the previous night. So Shluchei Bezin Yotzim Erev Yom Tiv, the day before Pesach, Erev Pesach, the Shluchei Bezin would go, and they would tie the barley into bundles. While it's still attached, they would tie it together in bundles, so that it's all in one area, it's easier to cut. Meaning they would basically make hachanas on Erev Pesach to cut the barley. Then, as the first night of the first day of Pesach is ending, so let's say, close to Shkia, Mincha time, when it's still Yom Tiv, so already by that night, they're going to be cutting the barley. So close to the night, already, all the cities that are near the barley, let's say the barley was in a field outside of a couple cities, all the people from that city would start traveling because they wanted it to be a lot of people, because they wanted it to be publicized. Now, and you're going to see the ceremony is interesting. Once it became dark, and now Yom Tov is over, now it's officially Chol Hamoed, and now it's ready to do it. Basically, the one who was reaping would constantly say, "Ba Hashemesh, is Yom Tov over?" Amar Hain, and everyone would respond, "Yes." And he would say, "Ba Shemesh," he would repeat it, Amar Hain. And as the Mishnah is going to point out, everything that was said was done 3 times. Again, this is all just to publicize it. Then he would say, "Magel Zu, should I use this sickle?" Amar Hain. They would say, "Yes." Magel Zu, Amar Hain. Kupa Zu, should I put the barley in this basket? Amar Hain. Kupa Zu, Amar Hain. Again, all to publicize. Yeah, so the Mishnah is going to point out that it's really 3 times. The Shabbos, and when it took place on Shabbos, Amar Lahen, he would add, Shabbos Zu. It's doicha Shabbos, Amar Hain. Shabbos Zu, Amar Hain. Ekzer, should I cut it? Amar Vehim L'Ktsar. They would say yes. Ekzer Vehim L'Ktsar. Shalish Pama called Davar Davar. Everything that was said in the Mishnah, all the questions and answers were done 3 times. Hain Armalei, Hain. They would say 3 times, yes. Kol Kach Lama. Why is this ceremony repeating and everything public? And should I cut it? Yes. What's going on? Because the Baisusim, they would say, they used to say, interpreted the Torah, that the Omer is not on the first day of Chol Hamoed, but the first Sunday of Chol Hamoed. So it could be the first day of Chol Hamoed, and it could also be the third or fourth day of Chol Hamoed, depending on how Yom Tov, because they said Machras HaShabbos means the Sunday of Pesach. Tad Rabbanan. So the Gemara quotes a Mishnah in the Megillus Tainus. Megillus Tainus was a Megillah, we don't have it anymore, but it was basically listing smaller holidays in Klal Yisrael that you didn't say Tachanun, or you didn't fast, or sometimes both. So Elon Yom and these are the days that you're not allowed to fast because it was like a shtikul Yom Tov. And some of them also you're not allowed to make a hesped. So what are these days? Miyesh Yarcha de Nisan Atamni Bey, from Rosh Chodesh Nisan until the 8th of Nisan, he took him to Mida. As the Gemara is going to point out, there was a machlokes. Between, who is this? Tzedukim. The Tzedukim and the Rabbanon had an argument that lasted 8 days, some sort of debate. So I don't really know how the debate took that long. It's based on one pasuk, but whatever. There was an 8-day debate between the Rabbanon and the Tzedukim whether a yachid is able to donate a carbon tamid. The carbon tamid was brought daily by the tzibur, and the tzedukim felt that a yachid is able to donate the carbon tamid. The Rabbanan disagreed. This took 8 days long, and finally they won. Chazal won, and therefore, from the 1st of Nisan until the 8th of Nisan, it was always considered a shtickle Yom Tiv to commemorate that win. Deloy Lemispan, and you're not allowed to eulogize and fast on those days. That's from the 1st until the 8th. Uminitamni Beyad Seif Mayada, and from the 8th day of Nisan until after Pesach, Itusev Chada de Shvui, Deloy Lemispan. That was a Yom Tiv because Chazal beat the Baisusim, that they decided, this is our Mishnah, that the Baisusim said that that you don't bring the Omer on the first day of Chol Hamoed, you bring it on the Sunday of Chol Hamoed. And it was, I guess, a 2-week-long debate, and Chazal eventually won, and therefore it was celebrated as well. The Gemara speaks it out. What was the first debate about? Which is, again, bringing the carbon tamid by a yachin. Merish yarcha denisa na tamid by tukum to be the lesbad. Shei tzedukim. I mean, the tzedukim used to say yachin misnadim meidi tamid, that an individual can donate the tamid, which, by the way, would bring a very chaotic situation, because that would mean that the tamid is not brought by the tzibur. It can be brought every person every day. It's a chaos. Where do they get it from that a yachid is able to bring the carbon tamid? Because it says esakeves achad ta'aseh ba'bayker v'esakeves hasheni ta'aseh v'narboim. Ta'aseh singular. So singular meaning that even a yachid can do it. That's where the tzedukim came from. But it was a debate for 8 days, and eventually Chazal won. And how did they win? Maya Hadri, what was the reply? It says, Es karbani lachmi lishai tishmeru. Tishmeru is plural. Sheyukulan boy mitrumas alishka. Plural meaning that it came from the monies of Klal Yisrael, that it was a public carbon. That was the debate about the tamid. Now from here until the end of the daf, we're going to talk about the debate of the carbon omer. That again, according to Chazal, it's the first day of Chol Hamoed. Malchus HaShabbos is the day after Pesach, and Pesach is called Shabbos, and the Baisusim translated it as the day after Shabbos, meaning the Sunday of Chol Hamoed. Now, by the way, one major yesod that will come out of this, besides for a nafka mina as to when to bring the carbon, which is obviously important, you have to know when to bring the carbon, it'll also affect when Shavuos is, because Shavuos is 49 days after bringing the Omer. So if the Omer is brought on Sunday, like the Baisusim say, that means according to the Baisusim, Shavuos was always Sunday. According to Chazal, it could be many days of the week. That would be a huge nafkamina, as it's important to know. So the Gemara says, they used to say that Shavuos will always fall on Sunday because they count the Omer on Sunday, and that means that it's 7 weeks later is Shavuos. That means that Shavuos is always on Sunday. The top of Yechim Zakkai started to argue with them. He said, "Fools! Like, where is this coming from? Why do you say that Shavuos has to be on Sunday?" Now, obviously, they say it has to be on Sunday because it's 7 weeks after counting the Omer, which they say is Sunday. But he said, "Why does it have to be this way?" And no one was able to respond to them. To Rabbi Yechim Zakkai, except there was one old man who was chutzpah. And he said, "I'll tell you why Shavuos has to be Sunday. Is Moshe Rabbeinu oiv Yisrael haya? Because Moshe Rabbeinu loved Klal Yisrael. And he knows that Shavuos is the shortest holiday, right? It's not like Sukkot Pesach. It's only 1 day long. He wanted Klal Yisrael to have a 2-day Yom Tov. So he always made it on Sunday. That way you have Shabbos going into Shavuos. It's an Arish Zach to say that Moshe Rabbeinu would that the Ratzon of Hashem is that Moshe Rabbeinu loves Klal Yisrael, so that's why he's going to change halacha just to make it that it's a Sunday. It's a foolish thing. So Karlov Mikra Zer, Yechim Zakkai said to this Suzuki by Susi, Echad Aser Yoim Echarev Derech HaSeir. Klal Yisrael traveled 11 days after Har Sinai. Go to the next page. V'Moshe Rabbeinu oiv Yisrael haya lo ichra b'midbar b'im shana. Meaning, Klal Yisrael stayed in the desert for 40 years. Well, if Moshe Rabbeinu loved Klal Yisrael, that's why we stuck in the desert for so long. Now, obviously, Rabbi Yechim Zakkai didn't mean to say that Moshe Rabbeinu doesn't love Klal Yisrael, but his point is, the decisions that are being made in the Torah is not just based on Moshe Rabbeinu being a friendly person. When we wandered in the desert for 40 years, we wandered in the desert for 40 years. And therefore, we're not going to decide when Shavuos is merely based on Moshe Rabbeinu being an Oiv Yisrael. It's a shtuyot. And therefore, so what's going on? So what is the source? Amarle Rebbe Bekachata Petrani. So this by Susi said, so what's your source? So now what we're going to have is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 shitas that will prove that Machras HaShabbos, that the Omer is not counted, is not brought on a Sunday, it's brought on the first day of Chol Hamoed, and Shavuos is not always on a Sunday, it's 49 days later after the first day of Chol Hamoed. He says, our Torah, our perfect Torah, is not like idle chatter. This is the pshat. Kosev echad omer. See one pasuk that says Tisperu Chamishim Yoim. Tisperu Chamishim Yoim. We'll explain the way Rashi explains it. Tisperu Chamishim Yoim means that Shavuos is 7 weeks after the omer is brought. It doesn't have to be a Sunday. You see, if I was describing a Sunday, I would not say Chamishim Yoim. Chamishim Yoim implies it could be even a weekday. It just means the 50th day. But another pasuk says Sheva Shabbosos Timiyos Tiara. Sheva Shabbosos is 7 complete weeks. 7 complete weeks implies a Sunday. If I have something, if I start on a Sunday and then I end on a Sunday, that would be 7 complete weeks because the week begins on a Sunday and it starts on a Sunday. Meaning it ends on Saturday night, it begins a Sunday. So one pasuk says that Shavuos is 50 days later, which implies it's even in a weekday. Another pasuk says that it's 7 weeks later, which implies it's on a Sunday because 7 complete weeks, meaning Sunday to Sunday. So one pasuk applies Shavuos on a Sunday, one pasuk applies that it's in a weekday. What's the answer? The answer is, according to Chazal, that's true. You see, according to the Baisusim, it has to be on a Sunday. So you wouldn't describe it differently. The fact that the Torah has 2 different descriptions for when Shavuos is, which is Chamishim Yoim or Sheva Shabbosos Timiyos Tiara, one applying Sunday, one applying weekday. The answer is, according to Chazal, exactly. It could be a Sunday, it could be a weekday. That's exactly the point. Says the Gemara, HaKeitzad, Kabiyat Shchayis b'Shabbos, Kabiyat Shchayis b'Emtza Shabbos. And therefore that's a refutation of what you're saying, that it has to be on a Sunday. It's not true. The Torah describes Shavuos as being either on a Sunday or in the middle of the week. Rav Eliezer, a second source, Eid Tzarech. Harei Oimet Tispar Loch, Sfira Tluya Bebezdin, Shehem Yodim L'Chadesh. V'Machras HaShabbos, Machras Yom Tov, Yatsa Shabbos Bereishis, Sfirasa B'Chol Yoim. The pasuk says Tisparu Chamishim Tispar Loch. Tispar Loch means it should be counted by you, which means, although each person counts Sfira, the Sfira is dictated by the Bezdin. Now, if you believe, like the Baisusim, that it's always on a Sunday, then it's not really dictated by Bezdin. Doesn't matter what Bezdin says, it's always on a Sunday. But if you understand like Chazal, which is that it begins on the first day of Chol Hamoed, now what day is the day of Chol Hamoed? The answer is it depends. When did Bezdin make the Rosh Chodesh Nisan? If they made Rosh Chodesh Nisan on a Tuesday, then the first day of Chol Hamoed will be a certain day. If they made, then it'll be Wednesday. If they made it on a Wednesday, then the first day of Chol Hamoed will be a Thursday. Meaning, the fact that the pasuk puts the counting in the hands of Chazal implies that there's fluidity, and it can't just be on a, stubbornly on a Sunday. Rav Yeshua Omer, a third source, Amr Torah Mana Yamim Mekidesh Chodesh. The pasuk says we find there's 2 different countings in the Torah. There's counting of a month, the standard month, count 28 days, make Rosh Chodesh, and Mana Yamim Mekidesh Atzeres, and there's counting days till Shavuos. So, meaning just now, month of Kislev. The Torah says that you should count the month of Kislev. Not that there's a mitzvah to count, but there's a process where you count the weeks and then you make Rosh Chodesh. You count the weeks and you make Shavuos. Ma Chodesh samach lebiyasei nikar, af atzeres samach lebiyasei nikar. Im Tomer atzeres l'olam achar Shabbos, heich tei nikeres b'shulchaneha. Now, by Rosh Chodesh, when do you begin counting by Rosh Chodesh? The answer is very simple. When you see the new moon. When the sliver of the moon, when the moilid is revealed, that's when you count. It's super easy. It's clear. So too it is by Shavuos. You have to count at a clear starting point. According to the Baisusim, there is no clear starting point. You see, according to Chazal, the clear starting point is we count the day after Pesach. We start counting first day of Chol Hamoed. Clear in the calendar, it's set. First day of Chol Hamoed. Count weeks. Count the month by Kislev. After the moon is sliver of the moon is revealed, shine. It's easy. According to the Baisusim, when do you start counting? You start counting the Sunday after Chol Hamoed. The Sunday of Chol Hamoed. That's not clear, and therefore, because the pasuk implies that it's like a month, which has a clear starting point, which over there is the sliver of the moon. Over here, the clear starting point is having the first day of Chol Hamoed, which is clear, as opposed to the Baisusim, which is on a Sunday, which is a random starting point. You don't even know what day it is. It could be the third day of Pesach, fourth, second. Maya had the Gemara. That's the third source. The Gemara continues. Rabbi Shmuel Oimer Amra Torah Haba Oimer bePesach Ushtei Lechem Batzeres Malalad Regel Tchilas Regel Avkad Regel Tchilas Regel. Another source. We know there's two karbanos that are sort of bookends. You have the Oimer on Pesach and the Shtei Lechem on Shavuos. You count with the Oimer, you end with Shtei Lechem. Just like the Shtei Lechem is the beginning of Shavuos, so to the Oimer has to be the beginning of Pesach. Now it's not on Yom Tov itself, but at least it's the beginning of Chol Hamoed, as opposed to the Baisusim where it's the middle of the Yom Tov. It's not. The bookends are no longer similar. And a last source, Rabbi Yehuda beBeseira Omer, never Shabbos L'mayla. It says the word Shabbos regarding the Omer, never Shabbos Lamata, and it says the word Shabbos regarding the Shtei Lechem. By Shavuos, Mala Lod Regel Tchilas Regel Samachloi, Avkad Regel Tchilas Regel Samachloi. Same thing, but instead of bookends, it's based on the word Shabbos. It says the word Shabbos twice by Pesach and Shavuos. Just like by Shavuos, the carbon is brought by the beginning of Yom Tov, so to Pesach, it's the beginning of Yom Tov. Now again, it's the beginning of Chol Hamoed, but at least it's not like the Baisusa where it's randomly in the middle. Okay, just to finish up, we're going to have a brisa that basically repeats this. Let's just run through it very quickly. You shall count for yourself that every person has to count svira. Meaning, this is not just a mitzvah of bezdin, every individual has a mitzvah to count svira. The Bachras Shabbos, for the day after Shabbos. The Bachras Yom Tov. The day after Shabbos is not a Sunday, but rather the first day of Chol Hamoed. Edel Bachras Shabbos Bereshis. Maybe it means like Vaisusim, that you're actually supposed to count on Sunday. So now this brisa is going to quote all the opinions that we just said. Let's run through it very quickly. The brisa says, Rav Yossi bar Yehuda Oimer Hari Oimer Tisbru Chamishim Yoim Kol Svirish at the Sefer Lo Yel Chamishim Yoim V'im Tayir Rachas Shabbos Pam Shat Abaytza Chamishim V'echad Pam Shat Abaytza Chamishim V'shnayim Chamishim V'shloisha Chamishim V'arba and Chamishim V'shisha. What this means is like this. Basically, Chamishim Yoim means that it should always be the same amount of time. Now, according to the Baisusim, how many days after Pesach is Shavuos? The pasuk says 50, which means it's always the same amount of time. So according to Chazal, it's true. We start counting on the first day of Chol Hamoed, and we end with Shavuos. It's always the same amount of time. But according to the Baisusim, you don't start counting by Chol Hamoed. You start counting by Sunday. So let's say Chol Hamoed, the first day of Chol Hamoed is Sunday, so that is 50 days later. But let's say the first day of Chol Hamoed is Shabbos, so you're going to start counting the next day, so it's 51 days after Pesach. And what if the first day of Chol Hamoed is Thursday? So you're going to start counting 3 days later. So then all of a sudden it's 53 days after Pesach. Meaning, the fact that the pasuk says 50 days after Pesach implies that it's always the same amount of time. But according to my Baisusim, it's not true. You're not counting from the first day of Chol Hamoed, you're counting from a Sunday. So it depends how many days after Pesach, how many days after the Seder. Well, sometimes 50, sometimes 51, 52, 53, 54, 55. And therefore, because the pasuk does not imply fluidity, therefore the Baisusim are wrong. The rest, I think, are the opinions that we said before. That it has to be totally in Bezdin, and according to the Baisusim, it's not totally in Bezdin. It's always on a Sunday, but according to us, it's totally in Bezdin because it's the first day of Chol Hamoed. The first day of Chol Hamoed is based on the calendar dictated by when Bezdin was Mekadosh Shel Chodesh. Rav Yossi Machas Shabbos Machas Yom Tov. Atar Machas Yom Tov Ayedel Machas Shabbos. Amrit v'chineber Machar Shabbos shebeteicha Pesach haloi leneber el Machas HaShabbos D'chol hashana kula malei Shabbosis Tzei ubadek Ezer Shabbos. Meaning, let me read this again actually. B'Machras HaShabbos Machras Yom Tov. Machras HaShabbos means it's the first day after Pesach. Atar Machras Yom Tov Eino Machras Shabbos. Meaning maybe it's actually a Sunday. Amrit v'chineber Machar Shabbos shebeteicha Pesach. It doesn't say after the Sunday of Pesach. Rather, if the point of, according to the Baisusim, it should say because it's not really the day after. According to us, it's the day after Shabbos, meaning Shabbos is Yom Tov, so it's the day after Yom Tov. But according to you, it's the day after Shabbos Shabbataych Pesach, and therefore it should say that. It's the Raya the Baisusim are wrong. Another source, this we have before, never Shabbos Lamata, never Shabbos Lamala. It's a Shabbos by Pesach, it's a Shabbos by Shavuos. Ma'alad Regel, Tchilas Regel, just like by Shavuos, you bring the carbon at the beginning of Yom Tov. Avkad Regel, Tchilas Regel, so over here you bring the beginning of Yom Tov. And Rav Shimon Elazar Oimer, Kosav Echad Oimer, Sheishes Yomim Teichel Matzos. The Kosav Echad Oimer, Shivas Yomim Matzos Teichel. One pasuk says you eat matzah for 6 days. Another pasuk says you eat it for 7 days. So how do you reconcile that? Is it 5? Is it 6 or 7? Hakeitzad. How do you reconcile? The answer is matzah sheyev sheyachal achla shiva b'achadash ati yachal achla shisha b'achadash. The answer is you eat matzah for 7 days, but 6 days of it can be chadash. Why? Because you bring the oimer, which is matzah chadash, on the first day of Chol Hamoed. So it's a raya that it's always on the first day of Chol Hamoed and not on Sunday. I will stop here.